Charles Green was sitting in a big glass office on the top floor of the airline's headquarters. He was in the middle of a meeting with 10 important people. Charts were on the screen. Numbers, profits, losses. Everyone was talking about business. But Charles wasn't really paying attention. Something in his heart had felt heavy all day, like something was about to go wrong. Then his personal phone buzzed. No one had this number except close family and a few people from his past. He glanced at the screen. Maya Harris. He froze. The room grew quiet as Charles stood up slowly, eyes fixed on the phone. "Sir, do you need to step out?" his assistant asked. Charles nodded without saying a word. He picked up the phone and walked out of the boardroom, closing the door behind him. "Hello," he said. There was silence for a second. Then a small, shaking voice spoke. "Mr. Green, I'm sorry to call. I didn't know who else to call." "Maya," he asked softly, "what's wrong?" "They took my seat," she whispered. "I showed them my ticket. I told them it was first class, but they said it must be a mistake. They moved me to the back. Everyone was looking at me like I didn't belong." Charles didn't speak for a full 5 seconds. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He remembered Maya when she was a baby, wrapped in her father's jacket at the funeral. He remembered her father's smile, the same smile Maya now wore. "Where are you right now?" he asked quietly. "Flight 782 to Atlanta. I'm already on the plane. It's in the air now." Charles didn't speak again. He stared out of the glass wall in his office. The city looked small beneath him. "Maya, listen to me. I'm so sorry. You did nothing wrong. I'm going to fix this. I promise." She didn't reply. She was trying not to cry. She didn't want anyone to hear her. "Can I ask you something?" she whispered. "Anything. Why does this always happen to people like me?" Charles felt the words stab his chest like a knife. He wanted to cry too, but he couldn't. Not yet. He had work to do. "You just stay where you are," he said. "Don't worry about a thing." Then he hung up and made one more call. He didn't call a manager. He didn't call customer service. He called the air traffic command at the highest level. "This is Charles Green. I need immediate contact with the captain of Flight 782, and I need it now. No questions." The operator on the other end hesitated. "Yes, sir. Right away." Charles turned back toward the glass wall. He remembered the day Maya's father died. The fire in the cockpit, the smoke in the cabin, the panic from the passengers, and one man, the pilot, who stayed calm. That man was Elijah Harris, Maya's father, and he had saved 210 lives, including Charles. That day, Charles made a promise at Elijah's funeral. He stood in front of the small baby girl wrapped in black cloth, and he whispered, "I will always be there for her." And today, he had failed her, but only for a moment. Because now, the world would remember Maya Harris and her father, and this time, no one would be able to look away. Just then, his assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, the board is waiting." Charles looked at her and said one word, "Cancel everything." Maya sat in her cramped seat in the back of the plane, staring out the window at the clouds. The hum of the engines and the chatter of the other passengers made her feel like a stranger in a place she was supposed to belong. It was supposed to be a special flight, a celebration, a reward. Her first-class ticket was meant to be a symbol of her hard work, her future. But now, it was just a piece of paper with a mistake written on it. She could still feel the eyes of the other passengers as they watched her walk to the back of the plane. The whispers, the stares, the judging looks. She felt small. She felt invisible. She clenched her fists, trying to hold back tears. She didn't want anyone to see her cry. Not here. Not in front of everyone. But what hurt most was the silence from the crew. The flight attendants, who had so easily sent her to the back, now avoided her. They walked past her seat without a word, their eyes darting quickly away. Maya had always been the kind of person who stayed quiet. She didn't like to cause trouble, didn't like to make waves. But today was different. Today, she was being treated like she didn't matter, like she didn't belong, and no one was speaking up. She pulled out her phone and glanced at it again. Charles Green's number was still on the screen. She had called him, but she wasn't sure what she expected. Maybe she hoped he would tell her it was all a mistake. Maybe she hoped he would yell at the crew. But what could he do? She had no idea. Suddenly, the plane jolted slightly, a small reminder that they were high in the sky, far from the safety of the ground. The captain's voice came through the speakers, calm and smooth. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising at 35,000 feet. We'll be flying over beautiful landscapes today, and we expect the smooth ride. We'll update you on any changes in the weather. Thank you for choosing our airline." Maya barely heard the words. She was lost in her thoughts, staring down at the seat in front of her. Then, without warning, the seatbelt sign blinked off. The cabin suddenly felt tense, like something important was about to happen. Maya didn't know why, but she felt it. The air around her seemed to change. Then came the first whisper. "Did you hear? Something's happening up front." Maya glanced around. The passengers were no longer talking. Everyone was quiet, watching the front of the plane. The flight attendants, who had been so distant earlier, now gathered near the front. Their whispers were too quiet to hear, but they were urgent. Their eyes darted nervously toward the back of the plane. Maya sat up straighter, confused. What was going on? And then, the door to the cockpit opened. The captain stepped out. His face was serious. His eyes were locked on something ahead, and his voice, when he spoke, was firm. "Everyone, please remain seated and calm. We need to make a quick adjustment. We are shifting a few passengers around." The flight attendants quickly moved toward the back of the plane, but instead of helping the passengers, they were now focused on one person. One person only. Maya. Her heart raced. What was happening? The captain didn't stop. He walked straight toward her, his eyes still locked on hers. A strange tension filled the air. The passengers all turned to look, and there was a strange silence, a quiet that was too loud. "Maya Harris." The captain said her name like he was speaking to someone important. It made her stomach twist. "Yes," her voice was barely a whisper. The captain nodded, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "We need you to come with me. You're going to be moved to first class." Maya blinked, confused. "What? No, I can't. I was told." "I know what you were told. Please come with me now," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Before she could even respond, two flight attendants stepped forward. They didn't speak, but they gently helped her up. The other passengers watched in silence as she was guided down the aisle, her heart pounding harder with every step. She had no idea what was happening. But the look in the captain's eyes, the urgency in his movements, it was like something important was unfolding. As they passed the rows, Maya caught the eye of a few passengers. They whispered to each other, some shaking their heads, but most of them were staring at her, wide-eyed. They could see something was wrong. Something was changing. She was led to the front of the plane, her eyes still wide with confusion. When they reached first class, the flight attendants stopped. They stood aside. "Your seat is here," one of them said, pointing to the empty seat next to the window. Maya sat down slowly. Her mind was racing. She didn't understand any of this. As she looked out the window, she saw the plane's shadow pass over the clouds. What was going on? Why did the crew treat her so differently now? It was as if the entire atmosphere of the plane had changed in an instant. She felt a sense of power, but also confusion. There was something deeper going on here, and she couldn't quite understand it. But then, the loudspeakers clicked on. It was Charles Green's voice. "Maya," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This is Charles Green, CEO of this airline. I am speaking directly to you, and to everyone on this plane. What happened earlier today was a mistake. A mistake I will personally correct. The way you were treated was wrong, but no one is going to forget what happened now." The whole cabin fell silent. Every single person was listening. And in that moment, Maya realized something. This wasn't just about her seat. This was about much more than that. The world was about to change, and so was she. Maya sat still in her seat, her heart racing. The weight of the captain's words, followed by Charles Green's message, echoed in her mind. Every passenger was quiet, their eyes fixed on her as though she had become the center of a storm. The airplane, once just a place to travel, now felt like a stage, and she was in the spotlight. Charles Green's voice came again, this time louder, booming through the plane's speakers. "I am Charles Green, the CEO of this airline, the man responsible for ensuring that everyone, no matter their background, gets the treatment they deserve. And I'm speaking now to correct an injustice." Maya looked around. Every face was staring at her, some with curiosity, others with disbelief. It was clear that they were all just as confused as she was. The flight attendants stood at the front, clearly unsettled by what was unfolding. They hadn't expected any of this. They hadn't expected to be called out, not on a flight this high in the air. Charles continued, his voice calm but commanding. "To the crew, to the passengers, this is not a simple issue of customer service. This is about respect. Maya Harris is not just a random traveler. She is a guest, like all of you, and she deserves to be treated with the same courtesy." Unfortunately, something was lost in translation today. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breath. This wasn't the way she had imagined this moment. She had thought that Charles would fix the mistake quietly, behind the scenes. But no, he was doing this publicly. The entire plane was listening. "I know that for many of you, Maya's presence might be a surprise," Charles continued. "But what I'm going to do right now is send a clear message to everyone on this plane, and everyone who has ever made someone feel less than they are. We will no longer tolerate it." The plane seemed to shudder slightly. Maya could feel the tension in the air, thick and almost electric. She couldn't believe this was happening. What was Charles planning to do next? Was this about to get worse, or was it the first step to something much bigger? Then, she heard the seatbelt sign click on. The plane jolted slightly as it adjusted its course. The overhead lights dimmed, casting an eerie shadow across the cabin. But the silence was heavy. The weight of Charles's words filled the air. Then the flight attendants made their move. They walked to each passenger, calmly, with careful expressions. They didn't speak, just adjusted seats, moving a few people around. Maya wasn't sure what was going on, but it felt like the calm before the storm. A moment later, the captain's voice came again over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Harris speaking. I am honored to be here with you today as your captain on this flight. But it is important for all of you to know that I am not just the captain of this flight. I am a man with a mission to make things right. I was once saved by Maya Harris's father. And now it is my turn to stand up for her." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. Captain Harris. She had heard that name before. Elijah Harris, her father, the man who had saved hundreds of lives, who had become a legend in the airline industry. But Maya hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected the captain to know her father's story so personally. It was as if the entire plane, the entire airline, was coming together to defend her. Maya swallowed hard, trying to process everything. She had no idea what was happening now, but she could feel the change in the air. The people on the plane weren't just passengers anymore. They had become part of something bigger. They were witnesses. And it wasn't just about her. It was about everything that had led to this moment. The injustice, the discrimination, the assumptions that people like her didn't belong in certain spaces. But now, Charles Green was making sure that everyone on that plane knew that Maya was important. The flight attendants finally returned to the front, their movements precise and orderly. They spoke to one another in quiet tones, their faces tense but determined. Maya could feel that something was shifting, that this moment of change, was coming closer. The phone in her pocket buzzed suddenly. She pulled it out, and a message from Charles popped up on the screen. Get ready. This is just the beginning. The world will see you now. Maya stared at the message, her fingers trembling. This wasn't just about being moved to first class. This was about something bigger, something far beyond this flight. Then, another message popped up, this one from the captain. Maya, we will be landing in Atlanta in 30 minutes. Your life is about to change. Be ready. Maya's heart skipped a beat. What did that mean? How could her life change in just 30 minutes? And then it hit her. The world was watching. Charles Green wasn't just a CEO of an airline. He had the power to make headlines. He had the power to turn a simple flight into a message that would be heard across the world. As the plane began its descent, Maya realized that everything she had ever known, the quiet life, the back of the plane existence, was about to be shattered. The message wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had ever been overlooked, ignored, or treated unfairly. It was time for the world to see her. It was time for the world to see what really mattered. The plane began its final descent into Atlanta, the city skyline just visible through the windows. The lights of the airport below shimmered like stars, and for a moment, Maya felt like she was floating, suspended between two worlds. The world she had known, and the one she was about to step into. Every part of her wanted to close her eyes and pretend that this was all a bad dream. She had never asked for this. She had never imagined that a simple flight would turn into something this monumental. But now, as the plane circled lower, Maya knew that her life had already changed forever. The intercom clicked on once more, and the voice of Charles Green filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this flight is not just about your destination anymore. Today, we're creating a new chapter in the history of aviation. We are changing how things are done. We are changing how people are treated. Maya's heart raced. She was part of this history now. She couldn't turn back. As we land, we will be landing with a message. A message that says, no one should ever feel less than. Not in their seat, not in their job, not in their life. Every person on this plane has a right to be treated with respect. And Maya Harris is no exception. The plane touched down smoothly, and the sounds of the wheels against the tarmac seemed almost muted, as if the world was holding its breath. Maya glanced around, her eyes catching the faces of the passengers. Some looked nervous, some looked curious, but all of them were waiting to see what would happen next. The plane taxied slowly to the gate, but Maya wasn't paying attention to the usual chaos of landing. She wasn't focused on the typical sounds of passengers gathering their things or the hum of the seatbelt signs clicking off. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. Charles had said this was just the beginning. But beginning of what? The airplane finally came to a stop, the engines quieting. Maya stood up slowly, her legs shaky beneath her. The flight attendants stood to the side, waiting for the signal, their eyes following her every move. Then, Charles Green's voice filled the cabin again. I know that for some of you, the last hour has been unsettling. But today, it's about more than a seat. It's about respect. I hope all of you will take this moment to reflect on how we treat each other, because we are all connected, whether we like it or not. Maya glanced around one last time. The passengers were now watching her with open curiosity. Some were already pulling out their phones, clearly ready to document the event, knowing that this was about to become something bigger than they could ever have imagined. But Maya wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't angry either. She was just ready. As the doors to the plane opened, Maya was met with the bustle of the terminal. But this time, there was a difference. People who had once looked down at her, like she was just another passenger, were now staring at her with admiration. They were noticing her. A few people even stepped aside as she walked toward the gate, as if they knew something had changed. Charles Green was waiting for her at the gate. He stood tall, his expression firm but welcoming, as if he had been waiting for this moment all his life. He extended his hand to her, and without hesitation, Maya shook it. "Welcome to the next chapter, Miss Harris," he said. "The world is about to see you in a whole new way." Maya took a deep breath, her nerves settling into something stronger. She had no idea what was coming next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could face it. Behind her, the rest of the passengers began to exit the plane, but they weren't just walking through the terminal. They were looking at her now. The eyes of everyone around her were different. There was no more judgment in their gazes, only curiosity, and dare she say it, respect. As Maya walked alongside Charles Green, they were met by a group of reporters. Cameras clicked and flashed, their voices cutting through the air as they asked questions. But this wasn't about her answering them. This was about what they were about to hear. Charles Green stepped forward, his voice booming through the terminal. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, we have something important to say. Maya Harris is not just a passenger. She's a woman who has been treated unfairly her entire life. But no more. Today, we start the movement. We show the world that everyone deserves the same respect, no matter their race, their background, or their status. Maya's treatment today was unacceptable, but it won't happen again." The reporters looked shocked. They had expected a statement, but nothing on this scale. They started to ask more questions, but Charles raised his hand to silence them. "This is not about words. This is about action. Maya, if you'll allow me, I'd like you to speak." The crowd fell silent. All eyes turned to Maya, and for the first time, she felt the weight of the moment. But now, it was different. Now she wasn't scared. Now she wasn't alone. She had Charles Green, and the rest of the world was watching. Maya stepped forward, her voice calm but steady as she addressed the crowd. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because every person deserves to be treated with dignity. I'm here because we all matter. And today, this isn't just my story, it's everyone's story." The reporters were silent. The people around her were watching closely. Maya realized that this wasn't just about the flight. This wasn't just about being treated unfairly on a plane. This was the start of something much bigger. The world was finally going to see her for who she really was. The next few days passed in a whirlwind. What had begun as a single moment of injustice on a flight quickly spiraled into something much larger. Maya Harris had become a symbol, not just for black women who had faced discrimination, but for anyone who had ever been looked down upon, dismissed, or ignored. News outlets were abuzz with stories about the incident. Television shows, radio programs, and social media platforms all took turns analyzing what had happened. But the real shock came when the story reached beyond just the United States. In countries all over the world, people were watching Maya's story unfold. They saw the viral video of her speaking at the gate, heard the powerful words Charles Green had spoken in support of her, and witnessed the heartfelt response from the public. It was no longer just about an airline mistake. It was about justice. It was about people standing up for what was right. Charles Green, the CEO of the airline, became a beacon of leadership in the midst of this controversy. People weren't just praising him for his role in the situation, but for the way he had handled the matter with such conviction. His willingness to confront an uncomfortable truth about his own company had set him apart, and that wasn't lost on anyone. But while Charles's leadership was being praised, Maya was finding herself in a different spotlight. She was being called for interviews, speaking engagements, and press conferences. For someone who had never wanted to be in the public eye, it was overwhelming. At the same time, she couldn't ignore the weight of what she had become a part of. The world was looking at her, listening to her. One evening, as Maya sat in the quiet of her apartment, scrolling through social media, she saw something that stopped her cold. It was a message, one of many that had flooded her inbox. But this one was different. It was from a woman named Lisa, who had suffered years of discrimination in her own industry. She wrote, "Maya, your courage gave me the strength to speak out today. I've been silenced by my colleagues for so long, but now I'm finally standing up. You showed me that I don't have to accept the way things are. Thank you. Tears pricked Maya's eyes as she read the message. She had been so focused on her own story that she hadn't realized the ripple effect she was creating. People were listening. People were being inspired. It wasn't just about the plane ride anymore. This was bigger than that. This was about changing how society viewed respect and dignity. And Maya was leading that charge, whether she was ready for it or not. The phone rang, breaking her from her thoughts. It was Charles. He had called many times since the event, always checking in, making sure she was okay. But this time, his voice was different. Maya, I need to talk to you. There's a proposal I want to run by you, and I think it could change everything. You ready? Maya leaned forward, curiosity piqued. Go ahead. I'm going to announce a new initiative, Charles said, his voice steady and determined. We're calling it the Seat of Respect. We're going to work with businesses and organizations all over the world to ensure that everyone, regardless of their race, gender, or background, is treated with respect. And I want you to be the face of it. Maya sat back, stunned. The proposal was big, huge, even. It was the kind of thing that could make an enormous impact on the way companies interacted with their employees, customers, and communities. But to put her at the forefront of it, to make her the face of this movement, she wasn't sure if she was ready for that. I don't know, Charles, she said softly. I'm still trying to process everything that's happened. I didn't ask for this, you know. Charles understood, his tone gentle but firm. I know. But Maya, this is bigger than any of us. People need someone to fight for them. They need someone to show them that it's possible to stand up, to speak out, and to make change happen. And you're already doing that. Maya felt the weight of his words settle over her. This wasn't about the past anymore. It wasn't about one wrong that needed to be righted. This was about the future. This was about making sure that what had happened to her, what had happened to so many others, never happened again. She thought about the messages from strangers, the women who had reached out to thank her. She thought about the countless people who felt like their voices had been silenced. They needed to be heard. They needed a champion. Okay, Maya said after a long pause. I'll do it. I'll be the face of it. But we need to make sure it's real. We need to make sure it's more than just words. We need to make sure people feel the change. Charles's voice was full of pride. We will, Maya. Together, we'll make sure of it. The next few weeks were a blur. Maya found herself meeting with lawyers, policymakers, and community leaders. Together with Charles and a team of experts, she helped shape the initiative, ensuring that it would have a lasting impact. They worked tirelessly to create a program that would hold companies accountable for their treatment of individuals, provide support for victims of discrimination, and educate the public about the importance of respect in every interaction. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. There were skeptics. There were people who questioned whether it could really make a difference. But Maya was determined. She had already shown the world that one person could make an impact, and she wasn't about to stop now. The day of the launch came, and Maya stood alongside Charles Green in front of cameras, microphones, and a sea of reporters. Together, they introduced the Seat of Respect, a global movement that would change the way people were treated in businesses, airlines, schools, and beyond. As the cameras flashed and reporters asked questions, Maya felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't just talking about change anymore. She was living it. And this time, the world was listening. The launch of the Seat of Respect was only the beginning. What started as a viral incident on a plane had turned into a global movement. Maya Harris had no idea how far this journey would take her when she had first stepped onto that flight. But now, she found herself at the center of a revolution. The initiative was rapidly gaining traction, and soon, corporations and organizations from every corner of the globe wanted to be a part of it. Maya had become a force, no longer just a passenger on a flight, but the embodiment of change. She was being invited to speak at conferences, universities, and corporations to discuss the importance of respect, dignity, and inclusion. She was the voice of a generation ready to stand up against injustice. One evening, Maya sat in her office, looking at the sea of emails, press clippings, and messages from supporters. She had barely had time to catch her breath. It felt overwhelming, but also empowering. The noise was loud, but it was a good kind of loud. It meant that the message was reaching the people who needed to hear it most. Then, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Charles Green, still the same determined, calm man who had reached out to her weeks ago. He walked in, holding a stack of papers in his hands. Maya stood up, immediately sensing something important. "I've got some great news," Charles said with a grin. "We've received overwhelming support, not just from airlines, but from universities, governments, and even non-profit organizations. People are buying into this idea, Maya. And guess what?" Maya raised an eyebrow. Her curiosity piqued. "What?" Charles placed the papers on her desk and opened them to reveal a detailed plan. "We're not just stopping at airlines anymore. We've partnered with major corporations across the globe. We're going to implement the Seat of Respect program into every aspect of business. We're expanding this to every sector." Maya's heart skipped a beat. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. What began as a way to fight discrimination on one flight had now evolved into a global initiative that could change the landscape of how companies treated people, all people, regardless of their background. It was more than just a corporate initiative. It was a movement that could reshape the very fabric of society. Charles continued, his voice full of excitement. "In fact, we've already set up training programs for businesses that want to be a part of this. We're launching a global advertising campaign, and we've even secured a partnership with major media outlets to spread the word. The future looks bright." Maya felt a lump in her throat. It was hard to believe how far this had all come. But then, the reality of it hit her, the responsibility. With the power of this movement came the need for constant vigilance, for standing strong in the face of resistance. She could never let up. "What about the people who don't agree with this?" Maya asked, her voice steady but serious. "The ones who still believe that this is all too much. The ones who won't change easily." Charles paused. His expression became serious as well. "We'll keep pushing. Change never comes without resistance, but we have the people on our side. And we'll continue to educate, to show them why respect isn't just a courtesy, it's a necessity. And that's what's going to make this movement unstoppable." Maya nodded, her mind racing. She knew Charles was right. They had started something that was too important to be dismissed. But it wasn't just about policy and programs. It was about culture. It was about changing the way people thought about each other, how they interacted, and how they treated each other. This wasn't just corporate policy. It was societal change. A few days later, Maya found herself standing before a packed auditorium at a global conference on diversity and inclusion. She had been invited to speak about her journey and what she had learned throughout this process. The energy in the room was electric. There was a genuine sense of anticipation in the air. Maya stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. The audience was waiting for her to speak, and she took a deep breath before she began. "Years ago, I never could have imagined being here today," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I never could have imagined that a simple act of disrespect on a flight would turn into a movement that would change the world. But that's the power of standing up, of speaking out, and of demanding respect. It starts with one person, and I'm proof of that." The audience was captivated. Maya continued, sharing her story. How she had faced adversity, how she had learned to fight for herself, and how she now found herself fighting for everyone who had ever been wronged. But she also reminded them that this was just the beginning. The real work was yet to come. We have the power to make this world better, to create a future where no one has to face discrimination, where no one has to feel less than. But that change has to come from all of us. It has to come from businesses, leaders, and individuals alike. We all have a role to play in making this world a more respectful place. The applause that followed was thunderous. Maya stood there, feeling a rush of emotions. She had made a difference, but the journey was far from over. Back in the office later that week, Maya reflected on everything that had happened. The calls, the meetings, the messages from people around the world. It was overwhelming. But she had learned that the world could change. It was possible. It was happening. And Maya Harris was no longer just a passenger. She was the one steering the ship. The Seat of Respect initiative had become a global movement, but more importantly, it had become a legacy of change, of dignity, and of the belief that one voice, one person, could shift the tides of history. Maya smiled to herself. This was just the beginning.